Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
So it's this expression of chesed. It's an all-enduring, long-standing, far-reaching kind of love that comes from the very core of your inner being.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
This is Foundations, and we are exploring the concept of Shema at the moment, which has been given to the Jews back in Deuteronomy, and then it was reinforced by Jesus in the Gospels. Shema is all about learning the elements mentioned in it and what they mean to us. We're currently learning about loving God with all our soul, and it means so much more than just loving Him with our emotions.
It absolutely does. We've learned that even love is more than just emotions. Actually, you know, one of the things that I learned when I was doing a lot of study and reading on this was that the differences between these elements, like loving God with your soul, with your mind, they're all actually very integrated. So there's a lot of crossover and there are some distinct differences, but they're all very similar. So there are elements, like if you want to love God with all your soul, you know, it's the same as loving Him with all your heart, which in itself means to love Him with your soul and your mind. So that you know, they all kind of reinforce each other. Loving God. The word for soul in the Hebrew is nephesh, and it means a willingness to even sacrifice your very life for Him if need be. Okay, and Jewish people, when they die, I mean, it's the first thing that they learn to recite is Shema, and very often Jewish people, it's the last thing they recite on their deathbeds is Shema. And it's their final commitment to love and obey God in this life. And this is the kind of love that Jesus loved us with. He loved the Father supremely, and even though humanity was His enemy because of sin, He still obeyed the Father with unwavering loyalty. And to the human race who hated Him, He loved them with His whole life, even to the point where He was hated and abused and He was ridiculed and He was mocked, and ultimately He was tortured and executed in the most excruciating way. That was Shema. So Christ Himself obeyed Shema.
Yeah, exactly. So he loved with His life, but He loved unto death.
He did, and He did it as an act of obedience to God because He loved God, and He also loved us, His enemies. He loved us by giving His life for us. I mean, you want an example of what Shema looks like. You look at Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
Because He was the ultimate. He is our example. It is not an easy example because we're supposed to emulate Him. It's not an easy thing to do. Okay, so the word in Hebrew to describe love that's not in Shema, this word is not in Shema, but this particular Hebrew word encompasses Shema, okay, that you're trying to communicate, and the word is hesed. Now, hesed is a love that is so enduring and persistent that it will last long beyond the most extreme sin and the worst kind of betrayal. And it can reach beyond all of that kind of pain where you think that if something like that happened to me, I just don't think that I could ever, love a person like that. Well, chesed, that's the kind of love that God has. Now, there's a lady that I read a lot of, and a lot of my notes and a lot of information I've got is from her writings. Her name is Lois Tverberg. And she says this, she describes chesed this way. Chesed is a bone-weary father who drives through the night to bail his drug-addicted son out of jail. Chesed is a mum who spends day after thankless day spoon-feeding and wiping up after a disabled child. Chesed is an unsung pastor's wife whose long-suffering, tearful prayers keep her exhausted husband from falling apart at the seams. Chesed is love that can be counted on decade after decade. It's not about the thrill of romance, but the security of faithfulness. That's the description of what chesed is. That's the kind of love that our God has for us, and it's a love that we are then called to demonstrate to Him as well. And, of course, that's his due. He deserves that from us. But it's also probably the hardest kind of love to demonstrate because it doesn't come naturally to us. I mean, our very first reaction to somebody who gives us grief is to respond negatively. That is actually the natural response. It was like, remember I mentioned the example of the Egyptian Christians and their response. The natural response of a human being who has been hurt or offended or something is to lash out, is to insult, is to want to hit back, to hurt them, to respond in kind. That's a natural human fallen response. To respond other than that is almost a supernatural thing because it doesn't actually make sense and it confounds our enemies. And as it did, and the thing that's when I go back to that example of the Egyptian newscaster who himself was a Muslim, he said, this doesn't make sense. This is not normal. These people are of a different substance. And there was my understanding, there was a lot of Muslim people in Egypt who were also confounded. And that's the kind of thing that would spark their interest in coming to know a God who could produce such a response and reaction within them.
Well, it sort of differentiates Christians from most other religions, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense at all.
And do you think that that's part of the command to love God with all our might? Is there something deeper there? Because that's, in some respects, that kind of love is loving with all our might, isn't it? Because it's something that, we're actually going above and beyond.
Well, yes, it is. It is, absolutely, because, again, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in the slightest that we could have that kind of reaction. And it would, even though those people are dealing with the grief, and that was the thing, they were heartbroken people, they're dealing with the grief. So to actually step up and move past that and react the way they did would have taken an extraordinary amount of effort because it's still a conscious decision, because you can imagine that they would have wanted justice of some sort.
Well, as you say, it really is a supernatural effort, isn't it? Because it's something that only really is empowered by Christ.
Yes, it is. Now, the part of Shema that is to love God with all your might, uses a different word, like I say, as strength. The Hebrew word is meod, and the Hebrew word means very. Okay, so we're talking about strength here. It means to love God with all your very. Now, we don't think that makes much sense, but if let's just say somebody in Hebrew says to you, Ma shlomcha, which means how are you, then your response would be tov meod. Okay, tov means good, meod is very. So I'm very good.
Okay.
All right.
So you're good very.
Good very. That's how they would say it. And so if you're wanting to love God with all your very, it means it's this all-encompassing, with your strength, with your very, with might. And so it's like saying with all your oomph. It's to love God earnestly, zealously, to be enthusiastic about it. And that's why the translations say strength or might. It's with all your very, with every bit of grit and guts that you've got. And that's what the Egyptian Christians showed. Their strength was this grit determination that above all they would extend mercy and grace. That's strength. That's real strength, because the easy thing to do would be to respond in kind. The strong thing to do is to respond the way God wants them to respond.
Turn the other cheek.
Turn the other cheek. It doesn't make any sense at all. So it's this expression of chesed that is, it's an all-enduring, long-standing, far-reaching, all-embracing kind of love that comes from the very core, gritty centre of your inner being and cannot help but come out. That's what this is talking about. So you take all of this into consideration with everything that we've learned so far about Shema and loving God. There are no empty little gaps there in the human psyche. You know, you get up in the morning, you say, I'm going to give my 5 minutes or my half an hour of prayer to God. You kind of think the rest of the day is for me. No, it's not.
No.
It's for everything is for Him.
Well, there's so much depth to everything that we're learning about, and a reminder that the notes are available on the website, vision.org.au/foundations. You can dig a bit deeper there. On the next program, we're going to look at the next element of Shema, which is about loving our neighbour as ourselves.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.